All right, here it is. Monday's big question on Morning Kick Around. I was scanning social media as we do in 2025 because we're all super addicted, right? Right? We're all super addicted. Now, I am not personally on X, but I caught this on X because sometimes you just look around for news. I don't have the person's name here. I didn't include the handle. I think if you want to go find this tweet, you can, or post, or whatever you want to call it. This could be Chicago in American soccer, says this post. But instead, there's only one Division One team, and it's the Chicago Fire, and they are horrible. All right. An entire city being for just one team, and that quote-unquote grows the game, please. Hashtag ProRel for USA. Now, if you've been around American soccer long enough, and if you've been on social media, you know what hashtag ProRel for USA is all about. And I'm not unpacking that. That's not a thing. ProRel would be amazing in America. That's a statement of fact, I think, for a lot of us. How we go about making it happen or how aggressive we are about how bad the way that we run American soccer is, I'll let you do that. I'll let you handle that yourself. What actually caught my eye about this is the map that this post includes, which is a map of London and all of its soccer clubs, all of its football clubs. And I don't need to name all of them. Some of you know a lot of these, right? I mean, this goes as deep as Dagenham and Redbridge, who I think is playing in the National League. I'm pretty sure Dagenham and Redbridge is playing in that. And I think that club is also owned by the same people who own Brooklyn FC, which we talked about on our expansion episode of USL Championship. So multi-club ownership, yay! But Crystal Palace, Fulham, Millwall, Queen's Park Rangers, Chelsea, obviously, Tottenham, obviously, Arsenal, obviously, Charlton Athletic. It goes on and on and on. AFC Wimbledon, which has its own unique history. Maybe we'll talk about that one day. So this is just a map of London with its many, many soccer clubs. And obviously the post is implying that if we had an open system in America, if we had Pro-Rel, I guess that, again, we could have Pro-Rel and not have an open system. And you'll know that from when we talked about the first division that USL wants to launch. They're not saying, we're going to launch the first division and then we're going to have an open system because it's not up to them. Right? In America, we have businesses that operate as soccer leagues, and in order for there to be an open system, they would all have to get together and agree on how to work together, and it just isn't that way. So I think there are some hurdles to that. But if we imagined an open system, could we imagine an American city being like London? Is that possible? Now, there's just the obvious thing of like, oh, look how big New York is. New York could support a lot of teams if we had a Pro-Rel open system. Now, okay, let's take apart, or let's examine that principle or that theory at first. If we had Pro-Rel, we could have a city that has clubs as deep as London has. Is that true? Meaning, why aren't there more clubs? Is that really the reason? Like, if you think about it, the reason there aren't more clubs in, say, New York City, which is the obvious candidate to replicate London if this could happen in America, is the reason there aren't more clubs because of Pro-Rel. Because there isn't an opportunity to move up. And that if there was a chance to go from the 5th division to the 4th division all the way up to the top division, more clubs would exist. I mean, we're kind of ignoring the fact here, when we look at this map, that every one of these clubs is something like 100+ years old. Like, every one of these clubs started in a very different world of football. Every one of these clubs started before television, before radio in most cases, before there was any, when a neighborhood soccer club was your only way to experience the game. Literally, you might be able to read about a game in the newspaper or see a score or buy a cigarette card, but you weren't going to be able to interact with the game in any other way except to go see your local club play. So I think when we talk about this and this idea that, oh, if only we had Pro-Rel, this would happen, I think it misses a lot of that, right? The reasons why there were so many clubs in London is because every neighborhood needed a club. Every section of the city needed a club so that that section could engage with the game because they had no other way to do it. There was no other way to watch a football match except to go to your local or get on the train or get on the, I don't know, horse-drawn carriage. That was probably for rich people. I don't think the working class was getting in horse-drawn carriages to go across town to see their club play. So, I mean, I don't want to toss this out. Like, I don't want to throw it out and just say it's impossible because I don't think that's fun. I question some of the premise here. But I definitely think that we should be working towards the idea of having cities supporting multiple professional soccer clubs. Like, can we get there on our current path? Is that possible? Like, do we okay, let's I guess part of it too is, do we want this? Do we want this? Now, I'm also ignoring, right? So here's a local chopper. I believe that leagues in the US have one team per city. That's not always the case. Obviously there are, you have Chicago with a couple of baseball teams, you have New York with a couple of baseball teams. There is, though, this idea, again, because these are businesses largely, and especially in soccer, where you don't want competition within a city because that would hurt the possibility of success for either team you would have in that city, right? Territories. We've talked about this with USL. Like, exclusivity is a thing that owners want because why would they want to launch a club if they're going to have to compete with somebody else, right? If there's another team already in the market, it makes it harder to succeed in a sport in America that has always struggled with viability, right? So that's sort of this there's a pragmatic problem at place here, that we have a very different system of sports in general in the United States, and then soccer itself is still a tough sell in a lot of places, and then you're just talking about, like, what's the available oxygen? What's the available money? Who can you partner with? How can you be sustainable? How can you get, like, if you're competing for fans to come out to watch your games because there's multiple options for teams, then does that make it harder? I want this to be the case. I just don't know what we can do it without a time machine. And there's another major practical problem. Jack's film rule, I would say from an infrastructure standpoint, it would be highly infeasible because these teams are rooted in that city as opposed to taking teams and just implanting them in cities. So, again, you have a system here. You have a history here in London where all of these teams popped up when there was no other way to see the game, that every section of the city wanted to interact with the sport, right? Now, the reason not all these teams are first division teams is because of that, right? Because you just can't have teams. Not everybody is going to grow at that level over time, and it hasn't happened. There are some big teams in this mix, and there's some small teams in this mix. And I'm okay with the idea that we in our country can have teams at the lower division levels and also have teams at the upper division levels in the same area. Right? If that is a feasible thing in terms of the money, then we should be looking forward to that. If ProRel is necessary to make that happen, well, I don't know that it's going to. And when we talk about infrastructure, man, how many soccer stadiums do we actually build as a country? I know it feels like we have this big rush of soccer stadiums coming, or MLS has done a good job of getting stadiums built. But if you had an open system and you said, okay, well, you can start a team in the 5th division and you can work your way up, where would these teams play? We'd be playing in high school stadiums, and then what? Then when they move up, right? People don't like the PLS because they think some of those rules are arbitrary. But you wouldn't want to have a first division team playing in a high school soccer stadium. You wouldn't want that. Right? Again, there's some modern considerations here that make it really difficult to imagine that this would happen even with ProRel. But I like the idea of thinking about New York with multiple teams. And look, we've got NYCFC, You might not consider the Red Bulls in your team, but they're not that far away, and they're in the metro, so across the river. Brooklyn FC is coming, supposed to. I know Queens is done. Queensboro FC is done, like cooked, shut down, destroyed, eliminated. I don't know. Wasn't David Villa involved in that? It was wild because it was a big Q. At this moment in American history, their badge was a big Q. That's just funny. It's funny to me. Like, yeah, I mean, I would love it. Another Brooklyn team, a Queens team, a Staten Island team. They got a stadium on Staten Island they can play some soccer on. I don't know. I have no idea. I don't know. So keep those comments coming on if we want to get to this, what would it take? Right. And I'll also point out that when it comes to London, it is apples and oranges because in America, we have other sports that are more important than soccer historically that are going to make it more difficult for this to happen. Spectator sports were born out of the post-industrial revolution era. Right? Like as the industrial revolution happens, people have more time, they have more disposable income, spectator sports happen. And in England, football was king. Football was the only spectator sport that really mattered. I know they'll have rugby teams in town and stuff like that, but it's not even comparable. Obviously, here in America, not only did we have our own version of football, which became king, but we also had basketball. We also had baseball. Baseball, the oldest of our spectator sports. I mean, baseball fills the role in our history that football does or soccer does in England. And obviously, again, the way that sport developed because of ownership and franchises and that model rather than an open system club model, it's very different. But it set the tone for how we run our sports in America. So there's that. All right. Mark is saying, surprised you guys aren't talking about part 2 of the Tenorio Cardenas questionnaire of CSOs over on The Athletic. I'll be honest with you, Mark, haven't read it yet. Haven't had a chance to do that. So maybe on Wednesday's morning kick around, we can dive into that rather and do a little bit of a picking apart of what the CSO said, because I know that those guys always put in some very interesting questions. I did take a look at the first part, which was largely about who's going to win the league and who's the best player in MLS and who had the best offseason and things like that. And those are interesting questions, I guess. I mean, it's always interesting to see what CSOs think, but it's kind of prosaic in a way. So, yeah, this is where things get real interesting. Do you think MLS is taking full advantage of Messi in the upcoming 2026 World Cup? That's one question. Is fall to spring scheduling good or bad? This has been a big deal, right? Because MLS reportedly is seriously considering a switch. CSO is nearly unanimous that this would be a positive for MLS. One GM said he was not convinced it'll be good, but was hopeful it would be. I mean, that's interesting if it was nearly unanimous when obviously some of those CSOs work in places like Montreal and Minnesota. GMs in the northern market said it won't make everyone happy. Depends on which team you ask. The southern teams will say it's great. The northern teams are wondering how often the southern teams visit the north in the winter. Interesting. Club World Cup for Seattle and Miami, and how will they do? Seattle's probably not going to do very well. They've got PSG, Atletico Madrid, and Botafogo. Ouch. So, yeah, that's an interesting conversation that we can have on Wednesday. I don't want to burn through all of it. USL D1 came up as a question. Would it be a threat to Major League Soccer? I'll let you guess as to the answer. If you already have read the piece, then you already know. Internal cash market, how does that impact the league? One rule change that needs to happen. Ooh, this is going to be interesting. All right, we'll dive into that on Wednesday, I promise. All right. Appreciate you hanging out with me. Obviously, some interesting things to talk about here on a Monday, and I'm glad we got a chance to talk MLS and USL, Americans abroad, and all of those things. Again, reminder, please support the show, subscribe, and more important than just subscribing, go share the show with somebody or share a video that you liked. I know, again, I think we're I think we're hitting something with this, a lot of the USL coverage and the growth of the game, some of the expansion stories and things like that. I mean, we will talk about the soccer on the field, absolutely. But the story of soccer in America is the story of growth and the story of change, the story of leagues and expansion, all those things. And I think we can be a place for that. So if you like any of that, subscribe, join the MK Ultras, and share the show with somebody. You can always follow us again on social media at MKickaround, Instagram, Blue Sky, X, wherever you find your social media. We're likely to be there. I don't think we're a Facebook show, though. I don't think you're going to find us there. So sorry for your Uncle Ned, who's not going to be participating in Morning Kick Around on his preferred platform. And if you want to support the show with a little bit of money, you can do that at ko-fi.com/morningkickaround. As I do these out of order. You can set that up as a one-time thing or maybe throw us a little bit of money every month, up to you. Again, more ways to support the show will be coming on YouTube and elsewhere, I promise. You can reach out to us at morningkickaround@gmail.com. That's the email address if you're old school like me and like email. I currently have 41,151 unread emails in my inbox. Not all of those are important, so... But if you send a message to the Morning Kicker on the inbox, I promise you it will be read and we will address it and get back to you. So there's that. All right, that's it. That's what we're doing on a Monday. Shout out to Robert who couldn't be here. He will be back on Wednesday. We'll dive into that athletic survey of MLS GMs and hit up whatever else is happening in the world of football. So with all that said, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you soon.